Welcome to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success. I'm also excited to share my book, Straight from the Admissions Office, a review of my biggest takeaways from the first few hundred podcast episodes. It's packed with direct insights from admissions professionals and practical tips to help students and their families navigate the college admissions process. You can find all of the information in the show notes. Welcome to The Cap, where we are here to speak with college reps and other professionals in the field of college admissions to help answer all your questions and guide you through every step of the process. So if you're serious about college admissions, you've come to the right place. Are you ready? Let's talk about it. And now, here's your host, Dr. John Durante. Welcome to The Cap, the College Admissions Process Podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today Matt Harris, who's the Assistant Director of High School Review at the NCAA Eligibility Center. Matt, I've been trying to get you on for 2 years. I saw you at NACAC in Baltimore. I saw you again in LA, and here we are. Welcome. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
It's definitely going to be a lot of fun. I also appreciate the different nature of this episode where we're going to talk about the NCAA. So, Matt, could you start by explaining what the NCAA Eligibility Center is and why it's so important for student athletes and their families to understand?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the Eligibility Center is kind of the front door for college athletics. We perform amateurism and academic certifications for student athletes. And basically, if the one sentence explanation is if you want to play Division I or Division II sports for an NCAA school, you have to be certified by the NCAA Eligibility Center. We can talk about Division III, that's a little bit different, but there's no way to get that foot in the door without going through the Eligibility Center. And so we are a part of the NCAA national office housed here in downtown Indianapolis. And we are a group of about 55 people who basically, again, we're kind of the start of that process in the journey toward playing college sports. My role specifically is part of a group called High School Review. And what our team does is we're the ones who review the school accounts, the core courses. So most every high school in America has an NCAA account, and those high schools have courses that meet the NCAA legislation and are on their list of approved courses. And those are the ones that count for student athletes toward their certification. My role in that team is to review those courses to make sure the content and rigor meets the NCAA core course legislation. And I also handle a lot of student-specific issues. So issues maybe with something that's confusing on a transcript, grading scales, homeschool student athletes, all those kinds of things.
Well, that's awesome. Your office is definitely the start of the process, which is so important for so many student athletes and their families out there. So, Matt, what are the basic requirements for student athletes to be eligible for NCAA, let's say, Divisions I, II, and III sports? And how does the Eligibility Center play a role in that overall process?
Yeah. So, again, we are a part of the NCAA as a whole. And I think it's important to clarify when we talk about the NCAA, we're referring not to the group of employees in the downtown office, right? The NCAA is a membership organization. So the NCAA is all the member institutions, all the schools at the Division I, Division II, Division III level. So these requirements, the legislation, all those things are designed and agreed upon by the Division I, II, and III schools. And our role here at the national office is to enforce, regulate what they want. So kind of getting back to your question is the basic requirements are, we'll start with Division I. It's the most complicated. It has a few nuances that some other, that you don't see in the other divisions. But basically, a student athlete, from the time they start their high school career, so grade 9, a student athlete has 8 semesters, so about 4 years, to complete their core course requirement. and that requirement is 16 core courses. So I mentioned a little bit ago about schools having an NCAA account, and those accounts have courses that they've submitted for review and are approved for use in student certifications. And for the most part, these courses are your standard high school courses. Your English 1, 2, 3, 4, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, your regular level or advanced level courses. So a student athlete would have those 4 years to complete 16 core courses. Now, there are some specifications as far as how they're divided up by subject area. You have to have 3 years of English, 4 years of English, 3 years of math. So I won't bore you with all the details there. That's available for people who want to see it on our website. But you have to complete those 16 core courses to become a qualifier in Division I. And when I say a qualifier, that is a student athlete who is eligible to practice, compete, and receive an athletic scholarship in his or her first year in college. So for Division I, you have to complete the 16 core courses, but there are some additional stipulations to that as well. One of the big things in Division I is what we call the 10-7 requirement. This gets a little bit confusing. When I do outreach, I try to go over this a couple times because it's important, but it can be a little bit confusing. So the 10-7 requirement, what that means for Division I student athletes is 10 of the 16 core courses have to be completed before the start of a student athlete's senior year. So before you start that senior year, 10 of them have to be completed. 7 of those 10 have to be in English, math, or science. That is a Division I only rule. Now, when you stop to think about it, even though that gets a little bit confusing, most student athletes or most students are going to be meeting that requirement anyway, just because that's what the school requires as part of a track toward graduation. So for most student athletes, it's not an issue. Now, in addition to the 16 core courses, we have the GPA requirement. So for Division I, you not only have to complete the 16 core courses, your GPA in those courses has to be 2.3 or higher. And there's an important distinction between your core course GPA and your overall GPA. So when we're talking about the 2.3, that is just in those 16 core courses. But if you're a student athlete who has completed the 16, 10 before the start of senior year, 7 in English, math, or science, and your GPA is 2.3 or higher, you are going to be deemed a qualifier and eligible to practice, play, and receive a scholarship in your first year. Now, there are some other outcomes for Division I. So let's say a student athlete completed the 16 core courses, but maybe their GPA was just short of that 2.3. If it's between 2.0 and 2.3, you would be deemed an academic redshirt. So that's a student athlete who can still receive a scholarship, can practice, but can't compete in his or her first year in college. So not where you want to be, but that is one possible outcome. And then for students who either don't meet that minimum 2.0 GPA or don't complete the 16 core courses, they would be deemed a non-qualifier and unfortunately not eligible to practice, play, or receive a scholarship in Division I. So that's a lot of information about Division I. Division II student athletes, it's not quite as stringent. They still have to complete the 16 core courses. The GPA in those courses has to be 2.2 or higher. And then that 10-7, that's not a factor in Division II. And a student athlete who either doesn't meet the core course requirement or the GPA requirement in Division II would be deemed a partial qualifier. It's the same thing as an academic redshirt in Division I, just different governing bodies call it a different thing. So they would be able to practice and receive athletics aid, but not compete. There's no non-qualifier status for Division II. So you can kind of see some students that may be a better option for them. And then Division III schools don't award athletic scholarships. So Division III schools determine their own academic eligibility to play sports in college.
Fantastic. And so you emphasize the 16 core courses. I appreciate how you explained that for the most part, those are courses that go towards graduation requirements. And it's very important to be mindful, especially in the different divisions, in terms of those minimum GPAs. So What would you say are some common misconceptions about NCAA eligibility that families should be aware of? For example, does every single English course count as one of your courses that are approved through the NCAA Eligibility Center?
It's a great question. And so that, and then there's one other issue I'll mention that are kind of the common misconceptions, but we'll start there. So, no, not every course is going to count. So, we have NCAA core course legislation. And again, this is legislation that was created and agreed upon by the committees on academics that are made up of the membership. And the basic gist of that legislation is courses have to be considered 4-year college preparatory. And they have to appear on your high school's list of NCAA courses. And then we also want them to be at the regular academic level or higher. Now, schools have the opportunity to submit any courses they want. And our role, and this is one of the things that I do, is if we're not sure about a course, if a high school wants to add AP calculus to their list, well, that's a no-brainer, right? That's going to count. The content and the rigor are going to meet the requirements. But there may be an odd title that, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but math and society, something like that. We're like, okay, I'm not really sure what that is. And so what we do is we ask the high school for specific course documentation, and then we're going to look at it and say, does this meet our content requirements? Does this meet our rigor requirements? Getting back to the misconception, all of this information, these requirements, these lists, this is all public information. So for example, you right now could go to eligibilitycenter.org and look for the high school review committee's policies and procedures. All those course requirements, the legislation, and then getting into the subject-specific requirements. So different types of English courses, different types of math courses, looking for, you could look at, okay, what are they looking for in a geometry course? And this is public information. So we are taking the school's documentation and comparing it to that to determine whether it meets the requirements. And then the list of core courses, also public information. So anybody in America, anybody in the world can go to the Eligibility Center website, search for their high school or any high school, and view their list of core courses. And this is really important for anybody who has a role in this process. So college admission counselors are certainly part of that. If they are working with a student athlete or talking to a parent, they can go to that student athlete's high school list and say, okay, here are the courses that are approved. Are you on track to meet the NCAA requirements? And, here are the courses maybe you need to be taking in your senior year. So this isn't, while it's complicated, it's there for anybody to see. So that's one area maybe where there's a little bit of misconception that this information is hidden somewhere. The other thing is, and we have done a lot of outreach about this, is that just because a student athlete meets the NCAA requirements, that is in no way tied to the admission requirements at the school. I have learned in the last couple years that a lot of parents who are new at this process, there's a little bit of a misconception. I don't know if it's because they're not getting full information from coaches or whatever, but we've tried to make it a point to proactively point out that you still have to apply to and be admitted to the school of your choice. One other thing that comes up in that process is the test score requirement, right? That's a big topic and has been for the last few years in secondary education. So the NCAA used to have a test score requirement. Up until the 1920 academic year when COVID hit, there was a test score requirement where we still had that GPA requirement, but the higher your GPA, the lower your test score in the ACT or SAT had to be, and vice versa. So that was temporarily stopped during COVID. And then when all of the COVID aid, as it applied to NCAA, expired in September of 2023, the NCAA voted at the convention in 2023 to remove the test score requirement. So there is no test score requirement. You don't have to submit your scores for NCAA eligibility, but you might for the school you're attending. Every college is different. So that is the other big misconception, is both the test score requirement and the admission being tied to meeting the academic eligibility requirements. Those are completely separate things.
Well, those are great points. Again, students, athletics and the admissions process are two separate things. So make sure you're on top of it. Ask your questions, ask your questions, ask your questions. Also, go to the eligibility website to see the list of NCAA courses that are approved for your high school. Do not automatically assume that just because a course has the title mathematics in it, that it's definitely approved by the NCAA. If you're an aspiring athlete, do your homework, work with your school counselor, go to the website, and make sure that all of the courses that you're taking are in fact approved by the NCAA. Now, Matt, could you explain the differences between NCAA Divisions I, II, and III schools in terms of recruitment, eligibility, and of course, those scholarships?
Sure. So in terms of recruitment, that's going to be there are some differences between divisions, but it's also a sport by sport difference. But I can kind of give you the breakdown of what makes the divisions different, right? So for Division I, for example, there are 355 Division I schools in the NCAA. That's roughly one third, about 32% of schools are Division I. Now, in a Division I school, about 1 in 23 to 25 students is an athlete. And Division I schools have more sports. There's an average of 19 teams per school. And in Division I, 59% of athletes receive some sort of athletics aid. That may be a full ride scholarship, it may be a partial scholarship, but there's just a lot more options in Division I. Division II generally is going to be a smaller school. So for Division I, the average enrollment is just under 9,000. For a Division II school, the average undergraduate enrollment is just over 2,100. And 1 in 7 students at a Division II school is a student athlete. So they have that partial athletic scholarship model. So you're probably not going to get that full ride at Division II, but a partial scholarship. And while 59% of athletes in Division I receive some kind of athletics aid, 64% in Division II. So while there may not be as many scholarships, a higher percentage of student athletes receive aid. And then in Division III, which is actually the largest of the 3 divisions, there are 425 Division III schools. That's just under 40% of the total. Those are schools with an average enrollment of just over 1,600, but 1 in 5 students is a student athlete. And there are no athletic scholarships, but 80% of athletes receive non-athletics aid. So that could be need-based aid, it could be merit aid, whatever. So that's kind of a rundown in the difference between the 3 divisions. Now, the eligibility process is, I kind of outlined a little bit ago, there's a few differences in Division I and II. We talked about they still have to meet the 16 core course difference. So the biggest difference between those 2 divisions is the GPA requirement, which is 2.3 in Division I and 2.2 in Division II. But also Division II doesn't have the non-qualifier outcome. So in Division II, the worst situation is that you're a partial qualifier and you only can receive athletics aid and practice. Now, as far as recruitment, there are some differences in recruitment, right? So when we talk about recruitment, we're talking about in the pre-enrollment space. So, recruiting calendars, official visits, unofficial visits, and that kind of thing. And I can talk a little bit about what the difference is there. So the first thing I'll talk about is the recruiting calendar. Actually, let me back up and talk about what it means to be recruited, because that's a term that kind of gets thrown around a lot, and we hear a lot about it, but what does it really mean to be recruited? So what we tell students, parents, colleges, high schools is that if an NCAA coach is calling, texting, or emailing you, or messaging you via social media, or visiting you at your high school, or paying for you to visit their campus on an official visit, you are being actively recruited. That's what it means to be actively recruited. So that process can start as early as 9th grade, but generally that's going to start in the second half of high school, 11th or 12th grade for most student athletes. The other thing is that we have what's called the institutional request list. So when a school is recruiting you, they are going to put you on their institutional request list. This just means they are tracking your progress toward meeting NCAA eligibility. So here at the national office, when we look at a student's account after they've registered with the Eligibility Center, we can see if a school has put them on an institutional request list. In order to get a certification, that qualifier, academic redshirt, partial qualifier, to even get a decision in the process, you have to be on a school's institutional request list. And so that's in order to receive a scholarship, to practice, compete. So you have to be somebody who's being actively recruited. Now, the recruiting calendars, that's going to differ by sport. And the cool thing is, if you go to the Eligibility Center website, you can click on the resources page and look up the recruiting calendars. It is different for every sport, and it can be a little complicated. So the cool thing is you can look at the calendar by sport and then by division. If I were, for example, to look up the Division I baseball recruiting calendar, it'll tell me for the current year, August of 24 through July of 25, here are the specific dates where a coach is allowed to contact me. Here are the specific dates where I'm allowed to take an official visit. And that's going to differ by sport and by division. So it's all there. I won't go through it all here while we're talking, but all that information is there. And so those are the big differences. Now, within a division, the rules are going to be the same whether you are a Power 4 Division I school or in the Patriot League, for example. So you're still in the same division and you have to abide by those same rules.
Well, thank you so much. And you definitely gave so much information. And I just want to let you know, Matt, that I always put information in the show notes. So if there are any links that you want to share, just send them to me. And of course, we'll make them available to the students and their families in the show notes. I appreciate you talking about the differences between the sports, but also the divisions. Now, you mentioned the Patriot League. I was wondering, how does it differ between schools, for example, in the Big Ten or perhaps the Ivy League? What could you tell us about the different leagues?
It's basically the division. That's the most important thing. So when we're talking about the eligibility requirements, the recruiting calendars, all of those things that we've talked about, it's division by division. So whether you are at Ohio State or Texas, the largest schools in the country, or you're at Lafayette or American University in the Patriot League, you are a Division I student athlete and have to meet those Division I requirements. The Ivy League, they're a little bit different in that they don't offer athletic scholarships, but in order to play at an Ivy League school, in order to be deemed a qualifier, you'd still have to meet the requirements. Now, the school itself may have more stringent admission requirements, but you still have to go through the same process to be eligible in terms of the NCAA.
Right. Understood. And can you explain the rules related to when and how coaches are allowed to actually contact prospective student athletes? I know you touched upon this a little bit, and what families should know about this timeline.
Yeah, so again, I would encourage families to look at their specific sport recruiting calendar. That's kind of the start of it. Okay, when am I allowed to reach out to coaches? When can they respond to me? So that's the start. But then we talk about, the visits, official visits versus unofficial visits. So the difference there is that an official visit is when a student athlete visits a college campus and it's paid for by the NCAA school you're visiting. Now, to do that, and that's part of the recruiting process, but before you take an official visit to an NCAA Division I or II school, you have to register with the Eligibility Center. You have to be on that school's institutional request list, that IRL that we talked about. So those things have to happen first before a school can invite you for an official visit. An unofficial visit is any visit to a college campus where the student athlete and their family are paying for it. So, those are really common, so you may be a student athlete who, I'm not being recruited yet, but, I'm interested in playing the sport. I'm also interested in visiting this school because I want to attend there. So you go and you reach out to one of the coaches and say, hey, I'm coming to visit the school. Can I maybe check out the locker room, the facilities? That would be an unofficial visit. So that's the definition of, or the difference between the visits. But there's also differences between what a school can and cannot fund during those kind of visits. So I'll give you a little bit of an example. So for a Division I school, if it's an official visit, the institution can pay for your transportation for you and up to two family members. They can pay for your hotels. They can pay for up to 3 meals a day in what we call reasonable entertainment expenses. At Division II, they can pay for the transportation, the lodging, and just your meals in general. No, there's not a number of meals restriction. So that's just a little bit of an example of official versus unofficial. In an unofficial visit, no complimentary meals. You're still allowed to invite, offer some complimentary tickets to a game. In Division II, you can pay for one meal for the student and their family member. There are others as well, but those are kind of examples of the differences about what you can expect in an official versus an unofficial visit.
Got it. And I appreciate you specifying to look at the sport recruiting calendar, of course, for the individual sport that you're interested in, students and families. And I appreciate you talking about those differences when it comes to official and, of course, unofficial visits. So, what steps should student athletes take to ensure they are properly registered with the NCAA Eligibility Center? And how early should they start this process, Matt?
Okay, that's a wonderful question. And I'll kind of go back a little bit because we've talked so much about, oh, you have to be on the institutional request list and recruitment. But for most student athletes, especially early in their high school career, they're not being recruited. They don't know where they're going to college, if they're going to be able to play sports in college. So, but they can still start that process with the Eligibility Center. And while you can register at any point in your high school career, you can do it as early as your freshman year. So we have different kinds of accounts. And the first one I'll talk about is our free profile account. And this profile account is great because, again, it's free. And this is for any student athlete who, really doesn't know what their path is going to look like. And they're not really sure where to start. They're not sure which division they plan to compete in. And so they just want to get registered. So they go to the Eligibility Center website and they click register. And it's simple as that. There's no cost. They get their 10-digit NCAA ID number, and that's really it. They're in the system. Now, in order to get an academic certification, to do all the things we've talked about, you have to have the other kind of account, and that's called the Academic and Amateurism Certification Account. Now, there is a cost for that one. It's $100 for domestic students, $160 if you're an international student. But you have to have this kind of an account to go on Division I official visits, to sign agreements for athletics aid, to get the athletic scholarship. But the cool thing is, you can transfer that profile account into the academic certification account anytime. I'll give the example of my own son, who's currently a junior in high school. When he was a freshman, he's a football player, he's a long snapper. At that point, we have no idea what his plan is. But I work at the NCAA, so let's get that account. We sign him up for the free profile account. He now is getting toward the end of his junior year and probably looking at Division II or maybe FCS level Division I football. Still not quite sure. But we went ahead knowing that he probably has a chance to play somewhere, and last year transferred that account. So now, if he meets a coach at a camp and they want to recruit him, he's got that account. They know his NCAA ID number. He's had his transcripts uploaded. They can track him and see if he's on track to meet the requirements. So that's my own experience as a parent, but that's kind of how I recommend doing it. Now, you're going to have student athletes who maybe haven't even thought about playing sports in college, and all of a sudden they're in their junior or senior year. It's okay. You can still register. You just have to do it to get that certification. So it's never too late, but it's a really good idea to start with that profile account early in the high school career.
Well, we appreciate you talking about the different accounts, and perhaps other than not filling out the accounts, what other types of mistakes do students make that they should really be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is not getting the required GPA, right? Like that's
Right.
and that really would apply to any student who wants to go to college, not necessarily just a student athlete. And especially at the Division I level with that whole 10-7 requirement, these rules are in place so that students are hopefully having a full academic career. I don't know if there's a better way to put that, but they're not trying to make it all up at the end, right? So they're having to meet these requirements all throughout school. You have to meet your 10 core courses before the end of your junior year. And the whole purpose is so that students are academically prepared to succeed in their first year of college. So that's one of the mistakes that we often see. Another one is not communicating with the person at your high school who is your NCAA contact. It's normally a school counselor. It could be a registrar, an administrator, an athletic director, but every high school with an NCAA account, which is pretty much every high school, they have a primary and secondary contact. These are the people who are responsible and manage your list of courses. Usually it's a school counselor. And so when you are meeting with your school counselor every semester to plan the next semester's courses and you're a student athlete, just ask, are these going to count toward my NCAA eligibility? And most school counselors are going to know right away, yes, this counts, no, this doesn't count, and that kind of thing. It's just a matter of asking the questions. Whenever I've done outreach and I've had the privilege to talk to student athletes, or even when we've interviewed student athletes for jobs here at the NCAA, one of the questions I like to ask is, what do you remember about going through the eligibility process? Most of them have no recollection of it whatsoever. And that's a good thing. It means that they were on track. They were taking the right courses. Some of them will say, well, I know I had to register, but then that was it. That means they were registering for the right courses. Their transcripts were being uploaded by their school counselors, and there isn't a need to go back and forth with the eligibility center. That's what we want. So it's not taking ownership by asking the right questions, right? That's probably the biggest issue in terms of students and parents. Is just, here's how it works. Just ask the folks at your high school. They're going to be able to guide you through that process.
And the school counselors are just amazing. And I want to give them a big shout out, as I know that so many of them actually listen to the podcast. So for the school counselors, Matt, what should they be aware of when advising student athletes? And how can we best help them navigate the NCAA eligibility process?
Yeah, that's great. And I echo your statement. One of my former colleagues had a saying that, the NCAA stuff for school counselors is not important until it is important.
Right.
And then when it is, it's really important because the student athlete's probably about to step on campus. For counselors, the biggest thing is just to make sure that the NCAA list of core courses at their school is up to date, right? Because schools are all the time adding new titles or changing titles. And what you don't want is a student who takes a course that probably would meet the requirements, but it's not being used because it's not on their list. And so just as a general rule, we say once a year, update your list of core courses in your Eligibility Center account. Some do it more often, some do it less. But that's the biggest thing. And I know it's a lot of work. I know it's just a tiny part of the important work that these folks do all the time. But that's one thing, is just making sure that the account is up to date. And then the other thing is uploading student transcripts. So we recommend that students who have an account have their transcripts uploaded at least the end of their junior year, and then again when they graduate, because we have to have that final transcript on file in order to complete the certification. So again, most high schools, especially those who are sending students every year to NCAA schools, this is just part of what they do. And then the other thing I would say is taking advantage of the Eligibility Center's customer service. We have real live people sitting that their job is to take calls from either NCAA member schools or high schools, specifically about all this stuff we're talking about. And if they have a question about a specific student athlete, that person can immediately pull up their account and let them know, okay, here's what's going on, here's what you need to do, this is the documentation we need. It, it's as easy as a phone call. These are bright, brilliant folks that I work with every day. So those are the biggest things I would say to be aware of when you're advising student athletes.
Well, that's great advice. First of all, update your course list. It's so important. And of course, make sure that the transcripts are also uploaded. And of course, reach out. I have experience with it myself. I know that anytime we had to reach out, you guys are truly awesome. So a big shout out, of course, to the NCAA, you, Matt, and all of your colleagues. This has been awesome. Unfortunately, Matt, it does lead us to that last question, which is, and you've given so many, right? But what are the most important pieces of advice you'd leave to high school student athletes who just are starting the college recruitment process right now?
Yeah. So again, I'll reiterate, making sure you're focused on the requirements for admission to your school. Before you ever even think about the NCAA part of it, am I going to be accepted to this school? And then asking the questions that all students should be asking, not just student athletes. What are my financial aid options? Because we talked about how, Division II, for example, you're looking at partial scholarships, and in a lot of Division I as well. Are there other opportunities for either need-based or merit-based aid? So just because you're an athlete doesn't mean you shouldn't be asking those questions. So that's a big piece of advice. And then the other thing is, again, those school counselors. Find out who at your high school is the person who is your NCAA contact, and make sure that you are talking to that person and taking agency or ownership in this process. If you do that, you'll be one of the student athletes most likely who doesn't really remember much about the eligibility process. If you are on track to graduate with again, it's a 2.3 GPA in those courses. If you're meeting your high school's requirements for graduation and you got that 2.3, you're probably already meeting the requirements and you don't even know it. But just ask. Make sure you're taking the right courses. Most of the time you are, but if you can find out if there's any deficiencies, either in the number of courses, the type of course ahead of time, it's so easy to rectify as opposed to doing after you've graduated and then you're scrambling to try to be eligible literally the day before your first competition in college. And that does happen.
Yeah, it definitely does happen. So great advice in terms of taking agency and being on top of your own journey, students. Matt, this was awesome. I'm so happy, as I know it's going to help so many students and their families. And it's really cool because typically I have college admissions representatives. So it was awesome to have you representing the NCAA and helping so many current student athletes and future, hopefully, collegiate athletes and their families. So I hope to have you again, Matt. You are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
It was our pleasure. And to everyone out there, good luck with the college search. Take care all, and best wishes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The CAP. Thank you for listening to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success.